welcome to the Graveyard Corpses and Wendigos. You're listening to the Hallow Horror Pod, an extension of the television show The Hallow Horror Hour, which you can see on Tubi, Plex, Roku, SCC TV 28, and YouTube. No one knows when I may strike, in which hidden, unsuspecting corner I may lurk, at every tick of the clock, every beat upon your heart. I am your horror host Ghost from the upper left coast, Hallow Ian, and today we are diving deep into my personal vault of horrors to crack open the pages of horror comics. But I am not alone. I have two other podcasters of the perverse joining me. He's the MT Graves to my Crypt Keeper. It's author Joseph Wilke. How are you, Joseph? And please let folks know who you are.
Well, you already let them know who I am. I'm Joseph Wilke. I have my own anthology series called House of Doom, with two of them already out. House of Doom, Coffee House of Doom, with a rumor is third one launching on Kickstarter April 20th called Greenhouse of Doom.
Exciting. I have my signed copy of Coffee House of Doom sitting right next to me because I brought lots of show and tell for this audio medium where nobody can see what I'm holding up. But
They
I've
can
got a
picture it in
stack
their
of
mind.
comics. Yes, absolutely. And he's doing his best Vampirella cosplay, and might I say, looking fantastic. Craig, let us know who you are and or how you are, and introduce yourself to the people.
My name is Craig Hurd-McKenney. I am a writer of horror graphic novels. I am doing really well. I would sort of blurb Some Strange Disturbances, which is a queer Victorian horror graphic novel series that I've been doing since 2018. I have a short in the first issue return of Boris Karloff Golki Mysteries, and I just launched a return of the Dark Shadows TV show with Cursive Dark Shadows, out now from Hermes Press.
Wow. Well, we have a really stacked group here to talk about this. Your accolades in literature and horror comics make you well versed on this topic, and I'm excited to have you both on the show. Being the horror host, horror comics have a long history of horror hosts. In fact, many of the horror hosts that we think of today in television and film were inspired by the comics because a lot of the comic book characters came before the TV folks. So that brings me to our first question. What is our personal history with comics? Craig, can we start with you?
Sure. I am a gentleman of a certain age, so a lot of my comics related experience is kind of entangled with like the Saturday morning Super Friends show, the sort of Pizza Hut hero glasses, drinking glasses. You used to be able to get like your mini comics with the Slurpees from 7-Eleven. And then I was at a friend's birthday party when I was probably in elementary school. And one of the prizes was a comic book. It was World's Finest. I believe it was issue 276. And in it, the cliffhanger was that Superman was giving up his powers to save Batman. Or maybe I have it reversed. Maybe it was Batman putting himself in danger to save Superman. Anyway, it ended with one of them theoretically dying. And it was terrifying. And it still lingers with me today.
And they stayed dead forever, right?
Yes, in that universe anyway. And yeah, so then from there, I just remember buying comics at the little convenience store next to my middle school, and then comic shops starting to open and really getting into like the 80s independent movement. Later, like Vertigo Comics when I was in college. So it's been a lifelong love with comics, and especially horror comics.
Excellent. Joseph, how about yourself? What was your first comic experience?
Oh man, I grew up pretty much the best time to be a comic book fan in the early 90s, right? So this was just everywhere.
Yeah.
I had a great local comic book shop, the Comic Stop over in Linwood. So I would go there all the time because my dad loved it that I had a hobby that didn't cost over $10. I used to go to like these really like hole in the wall conventions in the area, and it was great because you would like the entry fee was like a can of soup that you could donate to a food bank and get into that. My mom would take me to those all the time, and I would just pick up random issues of whatever, and that would help me figure out like a taste of, do I like Superman? Do I like Batman? Do I like Spider-Man? And Spider-Man was kind of like my the thing that I clung to the most growing up, right? I'll never forget the first time I experienced like a real horror comic. I was at Comic Stop and bought a few things, and the person working there threw in a manga sampler for free. It was just
Oh,
chapters from Viz's like upcoming manga that they have coming out, right? And I will never forget because the very last thing in that sampler, there's this big page before it that said, "Do not read this if you're over 18 or if you're under 18." And of course, me being 12, I had to read it, right? And it was the very first chapter of Junji Ito's Gayu.
Excellent.
That was my first exposure to horror manga and horror comics in general. So I got thrown into the deep end at a very young age.
wow.
That's intense. Well, my own personal history with comics is actually a little less it's a lot more recent because growing up I actually had a lot of trouble tracking which panel I was supposed to go to next. And so I didn't read a lot of comics growing up. I collected a lot of cards. I loved a lot of the Rob Liefeld influenced art. I was a big fan of like Ghost Rider and that kind of stuff. But I actually got more of my comic book knowledge from like learning the backstory of the Crypt Keeper on HBO and being absolutely terrified of him, and learning about anthologies through their adaptations for children's TV shows and stuff. And so I grew up reading, Goosebumps and a lot of like horror literature, but it wasn't until actually within the last like 5 years that I picked up James Tinney and the Force Department of Truth, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. And that really got me into comics. And then I started reading all of Moon Knight. I got the Unlimited and like got caught up with all of Moon Knight. And now I have a pull list of about probably 10 comics every month. Am a very active reader of comic books at this point, but it was not something I was super into when I was younger. I collected the Marvel Flair and Upper Deck trading cards, but yeah, I was not paying attention to the stories, and I was more of a Ninja Turtles and Power Ranger person than I was an animated Batman or animated Spider-Man person, so I really didn't grow up with a lot of the knowledge of the canon of what was going on.
Ian, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah,
So one of the things that I think about when I think about those book series from my childhood, I'm thinking like with the Goosebumps series, like there's something so tangible about the visuals of those covers, which
yeah.
I fully believe there's sort of a connection to comics and those books. Were you equally as attracted to the covers as the stories? My experience was that like with the John Belair's books that Edward Gorey illustrated, that I was always like perfectly drawn into the cover image as well as the book itself. I would also throw in there like what is it? Chris Pike had a series of
Yeah.
young adult horror novels, but
Point
those
horror, I
covers,
believe. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm sorry, I'll let you answer the question, but I'm just curious about your relationship to the covers of the Goosebumps books as well.
Absolutely. I love Tim Jacobus's art. I have the coffee table book where it describes the process of making each of the original, I think it's 62 covers, which he made 61 of. He was a really big prog rock fan, so his influence was actually like looking at the cover of Rush and Yes albums. And I was absolutely drawn to those. And I love the art of comics, but I had a hard time just moving from panel to panel and making sense of what was happening on the page because it was a little bit of a sensory overload for me at a younger age. So yes, I loved, and that absolutely drew me in to the things that I was reading. It was just and I don't want to sound like pretentious that I was like, "Oh, read like chapter books instead of comic books." Like cuz it could totally sound like that. No, I was just absolutely like overstimulated by images and words and trying to track what was happening on, when you have like 6 to 9 panels on a page and then all of a sudden it becomes one big two-page spread. That was a lot for my younger mind to pick up, and then I just didn't get into it until I found the right story and then went back and caught up on the stuff I really appreciated.
Yeah, I don't think that sounds pretentious at all. There are many people, like when I was in grad school, a lot of my classmates were interested in comics, but they'd never read them before. So I literally had to show them how to read them. It is another language, and it does take some time to acclimate to. So no, I don't think that's pretentious at all.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that they've had that exact same issue with comics, or first person to tell me that they've had that issue with comics.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But once you do learn to speak that language, and I think actually Marvel Unlimited helped me out a lot with that because when you're scrolling through, it takes you to the next panel very easily. So there are apps that do that kind of thing, and I would recommend that if other folks are having that experience. But once you do get that down, it's such an amazing medium, and we're going to dive into a ton of that stuff. Well, thank you for sharing your personal history with comic books. I think it's important that we do kind of give like an abbreviated history of horror comics before we dive into what makes a horror comic and some of our favorite personal stories. And I don't know how familiar either of you are with this, but I've been interested in it, so I've been watching some documentaries. The first horror comic actually was an anthology called Eerie that had, I believe, 5 or 6 stories in it. Are either of you familiar with this comic?
I have an anthology somewhere on my shelf here. I got from a used bookstore quite a long time ago with the first runs of those. Yes.
I don't have a collected edition, but I did have some random like single copies a while back.
There were a few that jumped out to me. There was like one where there was a whole lot of like World War II racism stuff still going on in the Pacific, and then there was one about a ghost that has to go out and do his first haunting, and he is really terrible at it. So it just feels like there was quite a juxtaposition of the tone in these stories. But it was interesting that the first horror comic was an anthology series, and that really like got popularized with the rise of EC Comics after Max Gaines originally started EC Comics as kind of a children's comic book series, kind of a way for kids to get learning material essentially in a fun way. But when he passed away in a boating accident, his son William Gaines took over the company and was advised to move into horror. And for about 5 years, they dominated the comic book world, especially with the horror art, the horror anthologies, telling kind of moralistic stories, maybe some stories that we might not agree with morally anymore these days, but it was usually somebody does something fucked up and then they get eaten by zombies or ghosts, a bit of a revenge story. These were recently rebooted, the EC comic series. What are your all relationship with the older or the newer EC comics?
I have a few of the volumes of the older collections on my shelves. You're right. You hit the hammer on the head of like reading back now. There's definitely some times where it sticks out quite a bit of like, oh, that did not age pretty well. But the art is still fantastic style wise. Even with the ones that have like some pretty dated shit in it, like racism, still try their hardest to land some sort of like dark, ironic kind of ending where the character. I gotta go grab these collections off the shelves. There's this one that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's basically about like one doctor is trying to trick one of his friends into thinking that he's a serial killer, and then like the big reveal at the end is that no, the doctor was the serial killer. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling on
Yeah.
that one, but I do love the old ones. I have a lot of friends and colleagues that are working on the new ones as well. So I've collected all of the horror series that EC has been coming out with lately and loving those.
And that's the Epitaphs of the Abyss.
Yeah, that's a limited series. I think that it wrapped up quite a bit ago. I think it wrapped up
Yeah.
late last year. And there's only about 10 issues of those, I think. I
Yeah.
think. But there's also like Cruel Universe and a
Yep.
few other like offshoots of that are still going on right now.
Yeah. I again with EC Comics, they did several like reproductions of those in the 90s. So that was kind of my access point to those. I have been able to since like pour through some of like the like original art pages and the collected editions like Joseph's talking about. I think I'm probably most familiar with the recent reboot at Oni Press. They launched that initiative at the same time that my sci-fi horror graphic novel with them, Station Grand, was coming out. So that was really cool to
Available now
see.
wherever books are sold, by the way.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
true. What I love about the EC Comics reboot that they're doing, or return, I don't know exactly that they're calling it a reboot, but I just love that it kind of captures some of that genre dissonance that you were talking about, Ian, where like some of it's war, some of it's sci-fi, some of it's romance, et cetera, et cetera. And I love that blending of genre that you really get from the EC Comics, and even the Erie stuff as well. And then the other thing I would say about both Erie and EC is that's where you see some of like the giants of comic creators really honing their craft and doing some cool stuff. Like Archie Goodwin was one of the editors of Erie Comics and did many stories for them. You've got artists like Gray Morrow or Joe Orlando doing amazing work, and those guys are still like, I think, a little underrated. But like, yeah, Steve Ditko, Gene Colan, like there was such a creative nexus around EC and Erie that I don't know if it was just that people felt freed to kind of go hog wild in those stories, or if a gig was a gig. Like I would love us to have a Ouija board and talk to some of these people to figure out what was it that was so appealing about these horror comics. But there is something which sort of represents like these greats of comics really doing these great stories pre comics code.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about the code in a second too, but I do want to bring up that this early EC Comics is really the popularized birth of the horror host. So there would not be a Halloween Horror Hour, Elvira, Joe Bob Briggs, Svengoolie, any of those without your initial like Mr. Crime was kind of the first one who started introducing in crime comics. And
Right.
then you have the Crypt Keeper, the Vault Keeper, and the Old Witch. And there was like local radio shows that kind of did these spooky stories before this, but this is really kind of the first time you get this iconography, which influenced so many other things that we'll get to as we talk more about other anthologies down the road here. But like the Crypt Keeper has to be the biggest one. The Crypt Keeper was from EC Comics, had the 70s British movie where he didn't appear at all, but Tales from the Crypt was still the title of that anthology series. And then the HBO run with John Kassir, which people are still begging for that to come back. So, yeah, it's just the amount of influence that EC Comics still has on modern popular culture can't be understated.
And probably in a way that people couldn't even really point to the origin point, which is one of the reasons I'm really excited we're having this conversation.
Absolutely.
We talked
Yeah.
about covers earlier as well, and it cannot be stated enough. Anybody who has ever done an indie horror comic, myself included, has totally aped and ripped off that iconic style of EC comic covers, which is the big ass text on a very bold background taking up like half the cover, and then like just a very shocking image that takes over the first to really grab your attention.
Since this episode is coming out in April, head on over to the HalloweenHorrorHour.com and you can see the cover or the poster art for our season 4 done by Eric Franklin, a local artist here in the Seattle area. And like I straight up said, just rip off EC Comics. We're gonna put like a big foreground image here. We'll put the Halloween Horror logo over the top, and then we'll have like little heads on the side saying also featured in this comic of all the other characters from the Graveyard Gang. So you are 100% correct, Joseph. I mean, I couldn't wait to do that. It was so exciting that we get to do that for this season. So before we dive into this next question, are there like really iconic covers that come to mind for people?
I think, Craig, we're probably going to say the same thing at the same time. Are you ready? We'll do a countdown.
I'm so stressed. Why don't you go first?
I'll go first, but come on. You know you're thinking the exact same thing that I am thinking.
I might be, but I don't know.
Crime suspense stories.
Oh,
The
yes.
the
Okay.
dude with the axe holding the fucking severed head with drool coming out of
Yes.
her mouth still.
Yes. Yes.
That to me
Okay.
is like that has got to be the most ripped off piece of artwork probably ever. Well, not probably ever, but you know what I mean. And then
But a lot.
it's been so iconic, so ripped off. caused such a controversy when it first came out, was part of the reasons why we had that comics code to begin with. That to me is like such an iconic piece of horror art.
Yeah. Issue 22.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. We should jump back to kind of the context of why horror went away for a little while, and that is because of a guy named Frederick Wortham, who was a
Boo!
he was a child psychologist who believed that comics were teaching people how to be gay and do crimes, which sounds like a good thing to me. But he really, really hated it. He spent years campaigning against comics and got the comics books code created, which essentially put a lot of these artists out of work and crashed the horror comic economy for many years. I will give him like one silver lining thing is that he wrote positively about integration in schools and getting rid of segregation. He believed that that was good for child psychology. He was just very wrong about comics and their effects on children. Any other things we want to mention about
He
Frederick
wasn't a
Wortham?
racist, but he was also a homophobe, and that was what really
Yeah.
kind of led his entire thing going on there. So you gotta take the good with the bad. Fuck this quack. I hope he burns in hell.
And you know
Everything
what?
that Go
There
ahead,
are
sorry.
comics. Yeah, there are comics of him burning in hell, and the bad guy being Wortham in a lot of stories since then has been directly related to this guy. So
Well, I was just going to say, like, one of the things that he sort of represents is this cognitive dissonance of good on one hand and bad on the other. It's interesting in a lot of ways because comics publishing in general is really kind of returning to this idea of extreme. I'll go as far as to say censorship, but there are a lot of publishers who are afraid to touch a lot of like extreme horror or anything that might involve black and brown issues or LGBTQIA plus issues. In a way, I'm really grateful that we have Wortham in the history so we know kind of the arguments that come up and we know how ridiculous they are. And we just need to remind ourselves that horror comics are significant in the fight to be, living in our free speech and our creativity. They're often at the forefront of these kinds of fights. And again, Wortham is a cautionary tale of that's the kind of person to watch out for.
I
I
yeah
100% agree with what you just said because that quack really was the precedent that started. I remember being like people in the 90s thought that Pokemon and Harry Potter were evil and satanic.
Mhm.
And if Pokemon and Harry Potter was around in the 40s, people probably would have listened to that.
Oh yeah, and like I grew up during the satanic panic of D&D in the 80s. It's just wild the way that I sort of view it this way. Horror is something that allows us to process grief. No matter the medium, whether it's comics, film, books, any of it. It allows us to process grief. And in some ways, these kinds of pushes want us to stay trapped in fear or grief or trauma. And that means that we are maybe more manipulable or unhappy or whatever we want to say. But, it just makes me embrace horror more because there's such like freedom, and especially in comics now. I mean, obviously there are still some negotiating behind the scenes as publishers become more or less cautious, but I just love that horror comics are at the forefront of all things like topical and pop culture right now.
I think it's also important to point out that in a contemporary context, when you have somebody like this that is fringe but has enough of a pedigree going around saying incorrect things, if they say them loud enough and enough times, other people start to agree with them. And that starts to become the reality for other people. And so I do think it is worthy of calling it out as kind of a warning thing because of the world we live in right now,
I
where
was just going to say that doesn't sound relevant to anything going on in the world right now. Why are we
yeah,
even bringing that up?
yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but I believe that like in the Department of Truth, my current favorite comic book series, there are people living in an entirely different reality from the one that I exist in. So, and I believe Frederick Wortham helped frame that. All right. Well, that was really heavy. I'm glad we said our piece about that because it is important to the history of horror comics and horror media in general. So our next kind of discussion point here is what makes a horror comic, like, and not like compared to other things with horror elements. What is it that like really is the definition of a horror comic for us?
It's a comic that's really scary.
And I think Craig, did you had brought this up? Was there something that you were thinking of specifically?
Oh, well, I just often hear, like, especially when I'm scripting, like, I have to always do a beta read gut check from a couple of folks. Like, is it too far? Is it not far enough? I think because, and I know we're going to get into this, but because of what I like was heavily invested in kind of my formative comics years, I tend to write much more psychological horror. And there is an interplay between image and word that can really build out that psychological horror in a very different and sometimes maybe more impactful way than, say, a novel or film. Not to say that the novel or the film doesn't equally do that in a specific situation. But I do think that comics are sometimes uniquely situated to really call forth the emotions that we want to have pinged in a horror experience. So for me, I just often hear, a variety of things like that's not scary enough, that's not really horror. And I mentioned it earlier with some of the hybridization of genre that Oni is doing with the current run on EC Comics. Like, horror can be sci-fi, horror can be romance, horror can be, insert thing here, Western. I'll throw in Western. And so I'm just sort of curious at people's metrics or uncrossable lines with what constitutes or what makes a horror comic versus a book or a movie.
I know people on this podcast have heard me talk about what makes horror a genre or what even is genre. And I've always kind of cast a wide net where, like, if anything includes an element of something, it can be comedy, it can be horror, it can be drama, and all of those things can coexist. And I'm going to go see a movie that's going to be marketed as horror. That's kind of how it is for me. But then I actually heard an interview with Ryan Coogler right after Sinners came out, and he kind of talked about the idea of genre being related to race and even like the history
Yes.
of it. Like, and he talked about like, well, is Sinners a horror movie or does it just have like a drop of horror movie blood and therefore it's horror, just like the one drop rule for black people or like that is ingrained in our history. And he he defined or described it so well about like how there was blues but there's like white people music, and so like if you called it blues it was black people music, but then if they wanted to release it they would rename it as a different thing. And that was
Yes.
really like the origin of genre in general. And so I think and we talked about this on our Oscars episode last month. Again, this episode's coming out in April, so we will have done an Oscars episode in March. You can cut
Now
that out.
available where every podcast is streamable.
Exactly. And we had this discussion of like, why does horror get snubbed at the Oscars so much? And it is looked down upon. So if you have that single drop of a horror element in your story, it is not as artistic as another form is. And so that's from
And
the genre
obviously,
perspective.
we disagree with that because we
Yeah. Yeah, of
have
course.
Giallo. We have like some
Oh
of the
yeah.
best films ever made are horror movies. It's so fascinating that since like the 70s, those films, horror films, are not talked about in the same way. Again, I don't want to get into a film hole, but I think your example of Sinners and Ryan Coogler is so fantastic an example because he's doing something that is horror, but horror across multiple ways of thinking about horror. It's psychological, it's generational trauma, it's man's inhumanity to man, it's all of the things, and that's what I find makes his work so engaging and intriguing, is that it's thinking about horror on multiple levels. And I think comics can do that as well.
Definitely. I think, there's lots of comics that where the like main character is a very mainstream superhero, but they have delved into horror. I mean, Doctor Strange is always fighting Lovecraftian monsters.
Have either of you been
But I've
keeping up with Absolute Batman?
no, I was just gonna say I have not been keeping up with any of the Batman stuff, but I know he dives into horror quite a bit.
Spoilers. Okay, if you anybody listening to this hasn't read Absolute Batman, just stop listening to this podcast and start reading it, because you just brought up a great point of like mainstream heroes getting into horror situations, right? Absolute Batman starts as like a pretty typical crime story, and then within a page flip throughout the rest of its continuity has been one of the coolest cosmic horror stories I have ever read in my life.
And yeah, no, there's just so much praise around that series, and I am so excited to check that out at some point. Are the other Absolute series getting into the horror realm as well, or is it just Batman?
It's mainly just Batman. Absolute Wonder Woman is incredible. She's in hell. She has the sword from Berserk, so she has the Dragon Slayer, and she's just kicking like Greek demon ass. Absolute Superman has kind of a rough start, but it gets better as time goes on. But Absolute
It's
Batman tricks you into thinking it's going to be like a pretty typical like retelling of Batman's origin story, and then slowly throughout the issues starts introducing different elements of horror until at one point every single villain that we're so used to seeing has been transformed into some eldritch abomination that H.P. Lovecraft couldn't even think of.
hmm.
Yeah, I was just gonna be really quippy and say that Lovecraft really couldn't think of any of his monsters. That's why he never described them and just told you to be afraid.
Ooh, it's really scary. You just got to think of it yourself. Ooh.
It's indescribable.
I was gonna say, I think Absolute Green Lantern has a little bit of a horror start to it as well.
Dude, he looks like fucking Jason. Have you seen him? He looks so cool.
That's great. That's great.
But I think one of the other examples that you were talking about, like Wonder Woman, whether absolute or otherwise, like she's always been steeped in horror because of the mythological elements and the ways that the artists, the sort of like the Wonder Woman artists, like George Perez or Cliff Shang on the New 52 Wonder Woman, like they're all tapping into some world sense of mythology and horror, and I think it's so interesting that Wonder Woman of all three of them is the one that tends to be the most horror adjacent slash veering into horror. But it's really interesting the way the Absolute line has kind of played with that quite a lot, more so than I think they sometimes do in the main titles. It's been really cool to watch that.
I like that you bring up that point because there's times in the Absolute series with Wonder Woman where she is the horror. Like
Which
if I was a Greek demon, I would just give up. I would move somewhere else. I would start a new life. I would live comfortably. I would do anything I could to avoid Wonder Woman at all costs.
Yeah. It's again that weird mix of philosophies, right? She will kill for peace. Like that's genius. How do you deal with somebody like that? And yes, if you are a demon, you should be on the run from her.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I have not delved into DC at all yet. The one that has always been recommended to me was The Long Halloween, the another Batman series. And I know I like a lot of his rogues gallery, like Scarecrow is a terrifying creature. And like I did see the picture of Absolute Poison Ivy and she looks absolutely amazing. Yeah, so I know that there's a long history of DC doing that. If we look over on Marvel, the one superhero I do follow is Moon Knight, and he's constantly interacting with Dracula. I had never done one of the crossover series, so I did the one last year and got all the titles where everybody was being turned into a vampire, and Dracula
Mm.
and Blade and all of them were there. And I got introduced to a new character that I need to check in on. Her name is Hallow's Eve, and she wears masks of different superheroes, and people actually believe that she is them, and she's just a Halloween character that is doing guising to blend in. So I know that kind of stuff happens in Marvel with like the Midnight Suns, like when Doctor Strange brings on Werewolf by Night and Man Thing and Moon Knight and Ghost Rider, and now there's Helverine too. So I that kind of stuff is constantly crossing over, but there is kind of a line between, is this part of the superhero main story arc or is this a horror series? And I think enjoy what you enjoy is really like the what it
Definitely,
comes
for
down to,
sure.
the genre thing.
You unlocked a core childhood memory of mine, though. I don't think I would have loved horror comics as much if I didn't grow up reading Marvel Zombies.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's got to be a huge impact for a lot of folks.
And my sort of touch point for that is in the 80s, several of the books went through a very horror hybridization. So, like Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz's run on New Mutants is very heavily influenced by horror. John Byrne's run on Alpha Flight is pretty much all horror, and so for me, those two are kind of foundational books. In the 90s, we had Chris Cooper's work. He was an editor at Marvel. He was the birder who was accosted in New York City, and that was a big thing a couple of years ago. But he worked on the sort of like 90s Marvel horror resurgence. It was Darkhold Book of the Damned, I think is what the title was. But that's another really great book. It had Richard Case, who did Doom Patrol at DC as the artist. So Marvel, yeah, they're tinged in there as well. And I really like, Ian, how you brought up like the early Doctor Strange books where they just really leaned into the Eldritch and sort of these alternate realms where horrific things lurked. But yeah, I would say the sort of formative things for me are those 80s Marvel runs where it wasn't like Dracula coming back, or sort of wasn't a themed thing. It was just the stories themselves sort of continued them on this path of horror.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue. You brought up New Mutants there. We dive into some of our favorite examples, and we have at least one crossover here. But if we want to start with New Mutants and talk about that, that would be great, Craig.
Sure. So New Mutants had kind of been this not as well regarded spinoff of the Uncanny X-Men. It was these new kids who had kind of shown up on the scene when the X-Men were in outer space, getting impregnated by the Brood. And it was really sort of meh. I mean, it was sort of standard superhero stuff. And then with issue 18, Bill Sienkiewicz joined, and it literally came unhinged. That first storyline that he and Chris Claremont worked on was called the Demon Bear Saga. It featured Danny Moonstar, aka Psyche, aka Mirage, and her battle with this creature that was trying to hunt down and kill her and her family. And they had characters get eviscerated in that storyline. It was just very deeply psychological in a way that comics had not done before. And Sienkiewicz's art, if you're not familiar with it,
Oh,
was
I am very familiar with it. I actually
yeah.
here at my show and tell, I have a 9.8 graded copy of Moon Knight number 24 that I was gifted for my birthday this year, which is one of the best uses of negative space on a comic book cover I can think of. It
Yes.
is, yeah, it
I
is
know
the
exactly what I know exactly which one you're talking about.
yes,
Um,
and it's amazing art. So go check that out. Moon Knight number 24 from October 24th.
yeah, Marvel has also done some great collections of that particular run on New Mutants. But so Bill's work is not at all traditional comic book storytelling. It involved a lot of collage, it involved a lot of mixed media. It was actually the reason why he left the book. They asked him to tone down his style, and he was like, "Why would I do that? This is how I make comics." And he ultimately left the series over the request to tone himself down. But yeah, that's to me that first storyline, the Demon Bear Saga, is a great place to start. if you're really looking for that psychological terror that the darkness of his art really highlights.
It's great. Joseph, what's one of your favorites that you'd recommend to people?
There's like so many all at once. I can't even begin. Okay. I would say if you're going to read anything horror wise, start with Junji Ito's Uzumaki.
Another book that's sitting right next to me. I have the whole collection right here for my show and tell that nobody can see in this audio medium.
I think that book is just such a masterpiece. It has some of the most unsettling imagery you will ever see in your entire life. It is such a masterclass in pacing. It's just stuck with me like ever since the first time I read it. The book's got to be like over 20 years old at this point, and its iconography is still everywhere.
100% agreed. And I would even say, if you are new to horror comics, I would put off reading Junji Ito as late as you possibly can because it really will kind of spoil you for other horror comics.
Yeah, you'll have trouble finding the feeling that you get while reading Uzumaki with
Oh
any
yeah.
other story. Even with other Ito, actually. I love a lot of other Ito, but nothing has reached the high of Uzumaki for me personally.
I don't know. Like Uzumaki is incredible. Don't get me wrong. I think Gaio is like the most disturbed I have ever been with any piece of media ever.
All right.
It's the one where the fish crawl out of
Yeah,
the ocean and just start
yeah.
attacking people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so not it's not just the unsettling imagery. It's the story. It's our main character. It's this couple that are really on the rocks when they finally get to this beach destination. They think that they're going to be able to save their relationship. And everything goes horribly wrong.
Yeah. There was a little bit more levity in that one. Like there was some humor around how bad everything smelled. And I absolutely love it too. But like, I don't know. Uzumaki just uh man, I read it regularly. I keep it next to my bed because it is, if I'm having trouble sleeping, it'll help me stay up all night. It's great. Okay, I'll talk about one of mine, and this was also on your list, Craig. We're both really enjoying Beneath the Trees. Do you want to
Yes.
talk about that a little?
Again, I've talked a lot tonight. I hate to sound like the broken record. I've talked a lot tonight about hybridization of genres, and this is like a very wonderful, completely unexpected melange of Richard Scarry with Silence of the Lambs with Blue Velvet. And I hate to use external references to talk about it, but really that's the best way that I can kind of encapsulate what it is. It's a very cutely drawn book that starts off with talking animals that quickly goes in a direction that you probably would have never expected.
To that point, season 2 of the series has had alternate art for all of the covers that are like storybook art. I'm drawing a blank on what they are right now, but they all are parodies of books we would have had in like preschool or like early elementary classrooms. And it's all, very identifiable art. Yeah, no, I think that those comparisons are apt. It is its own thing, but it is also wears those influences on its sleeve for sure.
What is this series called?
Beneath the Trees.
I am sold. Both of you have sold me on this one.
And they have a
Yeah,
sequel series that's coming out soon. And the main character, oddly enough, is appearing in the DC crossover event right now. They have a special DC KO. I can't remember the full title, but like they've got a bunch of non DC characters crossing over into this world. And the main character from Beneath the Trees, a talking animal, appears in this book. It's mind blowing.
Oh, the
the
Sonic the Hedgehog crossover. Just
there's the
kidding.
they're doing the crossover where it's like a tournament series where everybody like it's a bracketed like fighting tournament like they're in Mortal Kombat. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend this series. Beneath the Trees, actually, I go to Stargazer Comics here in Tacoma, and my friends Kevin and Damien, who run the store, they grab all the horror comics for me. They give me the first issue, and then they let me tell what to keep on my pull list. But I'm not on the comic book app all the time, like looking up new horror comics that are coming out. They just stick them in my box, and I get to check them out. And Beneath the Trees, absolute winner, has definitely stayed in there, and I love getting new issues of it. And then we'll snake draft style this around. Another one that's in my monthly pull list right now is Mark Spear's Monsters. Have either of you read this?
I have not. I'm
I
familiar
have
with
not.
Monstress, but not Monsters.
Okay, well, Mark Spear's Monsters has some incredible cover art on this first issue that I'm looking at that has Bela Lugosi's Dracula, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and Frankenstein's monster trick-or-treating at your front door. It does involve a monster hunter that's kind of dressed up as a like plague doctor from the Mid Ages. He's going around trying to defeat the monsters, and it's told in a very clever way. I don't want to give too many spoilers, though, because I do want people to check this out. I think the art alone will hook most folks, and I believe it is up to 8 issues right now. I have not read the most recent issue that because it's in such a beautiful blind bag that I haven't wanted to rip the blind bag open to see what the cover is quite yet while I'm catching up on some other stuff.
I'm looking up the covers right now, and I'm such a sucker for when I can tell, like, oh, I know the cover that they referenced on that one, and it's every single one. I'm looking at one where it's Dracula holding up a reflective cross, where it's ripping off the one
Yeah.
that one famous cover with Wolverine with its claws out with the Hulk in this reflection.
Yep.
You
Yep.
mentioned it's a plague doctor fighting these things. Does that
Correct.
plague doctor use a scythe?
He uses quite a few different weapons. I cannot recall if he has a scythe at all yet.
Thank God. I'm working on a dark fantasy comic about a zombie fighting
Okay.
plague doctor that uses a scythe. And holy shit, if that's somebody already beats me to market with that, I'm fucked.
I think you're in the clear, Joseph. I
All
think you're
right,
in the
good.
clear. And since this is snake draft style here, let's talk about another one of yours, Joseph. What's another recommendation from you?
The thing is that like I'm so far in the deep end that I'm trying to like even think of, oh, the stuff I've been reading that I really enjoy. Do I recommend this to normies or not? Uh,
There's no normies listening to the
there
Halloween
better not
horror
be any
pod.
normies. If you're a normie and you're listening to this, turn this the fuck off.
You're not a
Um,
normie anymore just because you're listening to this. Sorry.
Exactly. The name here is very Italian, so I'm probably going to butcher this, and I'm very sorry. However, everybody here should definitely read Lovesick and Doll Parts by Luana Vecchio, Vecchio. You were talking earlier about Beneath the Trees with its cutesy art style. This has like a very, for lack of a better term, girly, feminine kind of art style, right? The girls on it have like a very, very cute aesthetic to them, right? And it's contrasted by some of the most disgusting ultra violence you will ever see in your entire life.
That sounds fantastic. What was it was Vecchio?
Vecchio, I
V
believe.
Okay.
Luana, but the series is called Lovesick. How do I describe it? It's extreme violence, so if that's not your thing, then definitely skip out on it, right? It's all about like the underground internet cultures of red rooms and like extreme violence on the dark web and how a bunch of people are basically so obsessed with one dominatrix that they start a death cult around her.
But I
Huh.
also I'm not super familiar with it. I've seen some of the cover art, which I think is really really strong. But one of the things that I love about that book and series is that it is a female perspective,
Oh
which
yeah.
is something that comics is doing much better than it used to. I love to see that keep going.
Well, we're talking a lot about like creators trying to find their voice or creators not being restrained anymore. I think now that we're all finally over the that code and everything, this has been kind of the best time to be, especially an independent comics creator. Image Comics is taking more and more risks on the stuff that they are allowed to publish, right? Or the stuff that they are publishing. The author of Lovesick has it in like the opening page of like the quote is, "I genuinely can't believe Image let me publish this." That my
Yeah.
point being, it's great seeing that we're just so unrestrained that there's more opportunity for more people out there to put their best work out there, regardless of how unhinged it is. And I think, yeah, Craig, to your point there, I think it would land a little different if the series was done by a dude and it was about a dominatrix cutting people up, right? But it has
Yeah,
a very, very unique perspective from a very interesting character as to why violence is such a huge part of her life.
yeah. I mean, and the other interesting thing is like that's almost again another hybridization, right, of genre where I don't know. I just think of like this sort of like sexy '70s movies mixed with horror. Like there's just something that is, well, I'll say like I think sex positivity is also a relatively new thing in comics, and even just talking about sexuality in general in comics is still relatively new. There's just a lot to really like and support about that book. So I'm really grateful that you brought it up.
I also feel like it's very counterculture right now since we're kind of like regressing. You brought up sex
Yeah.
positivity. We're
Yeah.
really regressing in terms of being sex positive. So I think if a Zoomer reads this book, their head would actually explode.
Maybe we
I'm
need to
really
start sending it out to more of them.
I'm really interested in checking this out. Did either of you see the 2023 Quebecois film Red Rooms?
I did not. I think I have. Is it based off the graphic novel by Ed
Um,
Pi, the guy who killed himself after the allegations came out against him?
oh, I don't know. This was written by Pascal Plante or Plante.
Blonde. Let's
Plante.
see.
Plante. It's about a model becoming obsessed with a high-profile murder trial.
Ooh.
So it just, I'm getting similar vibes, and I really like that movie. So I'm definitely going to check out this comic.
I mean, they definitely fit theme wise because that's all that Lovesick is about. At least how it starts off with is like these underground red rooms that are only
Yep.
being broadcasted on the deep web.
I'll be sort of the editorial commentary here on this. Joseph, the book that you're talking about is Red Room by Ed
Yes.
Piskor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that sounds like it might be even a different thing. Red rooms, plural.
Plural. All right.
And
Maybe
also
it's the movie sequel. Who knows?
that's the English name. It's Rouge. Oh, I'm forgetting, but like the entire movie is in French Canadian, so it's like that really like,
Fake language.
yeah, harsh French, you know. But anyway, I'm definitely going to be checking out Lovesick. That's great.
Yes. Highly recommend.
What is another one of your picks, Craig?
Well, I came to this gentleman's work through his novels, and I was very excited when this book was announced because I felt like his work would translate really well to the comic medium. And this particular book that I'm thinking of is Victor Laval's Destroyer. It's been out for quite some time, so this will probably get into spoilers territory. If you are not interested in that, this is the part to fast forward through. But essentially, Destroyer is a modern day Frankenstein story where lots of sort of current topical issues are raised, especially around race in America. And it is the story of a young teenage African American who is shot and killed, and Frankenstein's monster is involved in his resurrection.
Ooh.
So great artwork. Victor has such a talent for voice. And again, sort of that multi layered storytelling, like we were talking about with Ryan Coogler earlier. It was just so great to see him kind of burst onto the scene with this incredibly confident and incredibly meaningful series. He's since done a few more series with Boom and has found an interesting way to tie them together. So my next sort of push is for Victor Laval's Destroyer.
I am going to go to my local comic shop and pick up a copy of this.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
I'll tell you, he also did a run on Sabretooth at Marvel, and before that, Sabretooth and the Exiles. And those two, like, I'm sickened that he's not doing them anymore. I'm sickened that they were canceled because they honestly are some of the best character work with some of Marvel's kind of secondary and tertiary characters. He's actually the only person that has ever made me care about Sabretooth.
I've seen Victor's name because the Sabretooth stuff has been recommended to me, but that's really cool.
So the issue of World's Finest that I was talking about is issue 273, cover dated November 1981, written by Carrie Burkett and drawn by Adrian Gonzalez. And in it, it is Batman who has to go into the power charger to save the planet because everyone else has fallen under the hypnosis of the weapon master. It will ultimately kill him, and in Batman's mind, this is worth the sacrifice.
That is the kind of thing Batman would do for his friend Superman.
That was back when they were like friends, too. When we weren't afraid of our superheroes being in a bromance with each other.
They definitely explored each other's bodies.
Allegedly, whether with contact or with the male gaze, TBD.
No, not allegedly. Actually happened. And you know what, DC's lawyers? This is being published through the Halloween podcast, so send your cease and desist to him, okay?
Batman, Superman, canonically fucked. Yeah.
I also was going to say that my hang up in your question earlier about are we going to say the same cover? I was torn between that cover and my own personal obsession with EC's psychoanalysis comics and those covers. So we were on the same page. I just was like, oh, but what about psychoanalysis? Like, I just love that book so much that
I did kind of put you on the spot there, so
it's all good. Like, I love that cover, but yeah, if you have not seen the psychoanalysis covers, you should definitely go and look at them.
I think the reason that Batman couldn't go down on Poison Ivy wasn't because that he doesn't perform cunnilingus. It's that he saves that for Superman.
I mean, I agree that he does that with Superman. However, it's canon that he eats pussy. If you remember that one panel that got leaked, that it caused a lot of controversy.
I thought that they cut that panel out because he doesn't, because the people at DC said Batman wouldn't do that.
I think it was Catwoman.
Now we're in the weeds. Oh, it might have been Catwoman.
Literally, if it was Poison Ivy.
Well, they are going through this sort of ebb and flow of, I think, pressures from the people that are buying and selling Warner Brothers. And then the other thing I would say is we're finally getting the completed Rick Veitch Swamp Thing series. So maybe we will eventually get the return of Batman performing cunnilingus to canon.
It's got to be canon that the absolute Batman eats pussy. It has to be.
All right. Should we dive back into our recommendations here? I believe
you have to include that line of absolute Batman eating pussy. That's my one demand from this podcast.
All right, George, keep that in.
Keep it in.
Make that the cold opens. Just flag us immediately.
If you, it's a good hook if you just bleep out the word pussy. But I'm sorry.
True.
Let's keep going. Let's go.
So Joseph, what's your next pick?
I'm going through my bookshelf here, and I definitely have to recommend. I have like a personal connection with Jeff Lemire's Gideon Falls. This was the comic series that got me back into Western comics after pretty much exclusively just reading manga for like years and years, right? It is as out there, wacky as any horror manga, and it is so original. The best way I can describe it is there's this legend of the Black Barn, and when it appears, bad things happen. I feel like it's one of those things where the less you know about it, the better, and just go in as blind as possible doing it. It has some of the best artwork and probably the best paneling of any comic series I have ever seen. I am going to spoil my favorite page because at one point a priest character enters the evil Black Barn and you flip the page, you see the character. This is so lame having to explain this because it's so much better when you actually see it, right? You see the character step out of the panel itself. You see the page, like the previous page, laid out flat as like a 2D plane that he has actually stepped out of, and that he's falling into the next page of the book. It is one of the most reality-bending, weirdo comics I have ever read in my entire life. And it's one of those horror stories that can only be told through the medium of comics.
It's also really accessible because it's only 27 issues. So you're not signing on for like a 50-year epic. It's very easy to get in and get out of and have a really great reading experience.
And unlike most of the comics that are my favorites, this one actually has an ending.
And this is the same author who did the amazing 2015 Moon Knight run, right? Jeff Lemire? Or Lemire?
Yeah, I believe it's Lemire. I could be wrong.
I think you're right. I think I just pronounced it wrong because I had Calliope syndrome about it for a really long time, which is, only reading something and not actually ever hearing it. So
Oh yeah.
I'm super excited to check this out because I'm a huge fan of his. I have a bunch of the Black Hammer series that I still haven't dug into yet, but I have read a few pages and really enjoyed. And that 2015 run of Moon Knight is the best Moon Knight, period. So I'm very excited to check this out.
If you liked his thing on Moon Knight, I'd also recommend too. I just remembered this, so this is counts as another one of my picks. However, I got to mention it. He and the same artist as Gideon Falls did a really good story about the Joker and how the Joker basically becomes obsessed with one of his doctors and psychologically tortures him.
Killer Smile.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay, then I'm writing this down. That's amazing. Okay, definitely gonna have to check that out. Okay, well we've come back to me, I suppose, and the next one I want to talk about is Hello Darkness. Are either of you Hello Darkness readers?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. This is the peak anthology series currently, in my opinion. I absolutely love so many of the stories that are in it, and I love so many of the people attached to it because it's really the only place where you can have James Tynion and R.L. Stine have a story in the same issue. And they don't stop putting out issues. There's a new issue almost every month, and I have been so excited to have a good horror anthology. And it has a horror host, maybe in a less traditional sense, but her name is Darcia, who is the iconography on the cover of the series. There's been so many really amazing ones, but one that always sticks with me from this series is a story about two girls going to play with butterflies and then getting encased in cocoons, and the the fly level of body horror of these small children turning into butterflies as they come out of the chrysalis is just absolutely intense. And there's so much beautiful artwork and so many interesting stories in the series. Anything you either want to say about that?
I'm trying to fact check because I think one of the stories I'm thinking of was either in Hello Darkness or it was in Epitaphs of the Abyss. I'll
Came
just
out around the same time. Like Hello
yeah.
Darkness started basically the same months that Epitaphs of the Abyss did.
There's also the ongoing story through which Garth Ennis wrote about the bomb going off you were talking about. Um,
Yeah.
it has such interesting characters because you see what their life is like a little bit before it going to shit, and then as it's all going to shit. I think that series is worth picking up. Hello Darkness is worth picking up just for his little mini story throughout all of these alone. There's some really, really interesting stuff that's going on in that whole entire series. There's Garth Ennis's like ongoing series that's going throughout that entire thing, right? There's also like
Or
a
yeah.
few like bonus chapters of Something is Killing the Children, which when I picked up the variant covers for all these, right? So it's hardly has any branding. You don't see any of the artist's name. And I marked out so hard when I flipped the page, and there's my girl from Something is Killing the Children in this series.
Thing is Killing the Children is the one TNAN series I haven't picked up. I'm going to pick up all the trades as soon as I have a chance, though. I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I was just for me, Hello Darkness is so indicative of some of the like really talented and maybe underrepresented folks. I think you guys have both touched really well on how they've kind of got these tentpole stories and then additional stories from folks who are just really creating cool stuff like the issue that'll be out in the 1st of April, issue 20. They've got two of my favorite current creators in there. Jorge Corona has a story, and then Lauren Knight has a story as well. So, what I love about Hello Darkness is that you've got the kind of tentpole name recognition, people pulling folks in, and then you've got like these really talented folks creating cool stuff that I hope more people really get to know their work, especially Jorge and Lauren.
And that's how these anthologies really should be. You have the big name Garth Ennis, and that's kind of like the headliner for a show, right? And then it's the local bands or like the smaller bands that are opening up for it. And then it gives you a way to get introduced to their work.
And that's what I love about anthologies and why the Halloween Horror Hour is what it is. You know, I create 4 anthology movies every year with an amazing group of people, and it's just to show off these fantastic filmmakers. But at the same time, you're also getting some filmmakers that have made like their first or their second film, but they still have so much potential. But when they can have their film show with, a Cookie Crumbles or a Gary, it only gives them a little bit more momentum. And I really love what they're doing with Darcia as their horror host, who she just does so much by just being on the cover of the series without ever having to pop in and give you a whole bunch of alliterisms and puns, as so many of us other horror hosts, myself included, are wont to do.
That should be when you're like really phoning it in for like season 20 of Halloween. You're just there for the poster. You don't even
It
like
just
say anything in any of the episodes.
Yeah, we're doing a beach episode this season, so get forward to seeing us on our beach attire.
You're gonna be in your Vampirella cosplay, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hell
As
yes.
long as I can borrow it from Craig. He looks so good tonight. Just joshing. Anyway, whose pick is it now? You had one more pick, Joseph.
I would say my last pick is pretty easy to recommend. It's an anthology series called PTSD Radio. It's a manga horror series done by I'm gonna butcher this, so pardon me, Masaki Nakayama. Every single story is about 3 pages. So you're in, you're out, and you see the scariest shit you've ever seen in your life.
That's
Also, I'm looking at the description right now that the supernatural entity that is haunting people is haunting them through their hair. So that's a hard pass for me. I have a phobia of other people's hair. So that would trigger me beyond all ability to function.
that's good to know your limits, and that is a very interesting route to take. Yeah, I need to get more into horror manga, so I will. I mean, we should probably even just do a whole separate episode about that, Joseph,
I
where
was just gonna say, do we have another half hour to go through all of it?
I should probably get schooled on you by that, because when it comes to horror manga or anime, I know Ito and that's it. So I would love to get schooled on that a bit more. Craig, you had one more pick too, right?
I do. I am going to throw out, since we're on this subject, I won't go into it, but I will throw out a recommendation for the Drifting Classroom.
Ah, yes.
If you are going to be exploring horror manga. But my last official pick is Upgrade Soul by Ezra Clayton Daniels. I've known Ezra since the sort of early indie days in Portland in the aughts. Huge fan of his work. He's a really kind person. And Upgrade Soul is I'm sure some people are wondering, well, why are you saying that this is horror? Because it is mostly like sci-fi. But to me, it's again one of these hybrid stories that is sci-fi tinged with body horror. So it's about an older couple who are submitting themselves to this rejuvenation surgery, and then it creates like mentally and physically superior medical oddities that they now must live in. And it's just a really fantastic exploration of identity, consciousness. Uh, it's been a while since I've read it. I don't know how much it gets into any sort of discussion of like aesthetics and sort of like personal grooming or what we look like and how that impacts others around us. But I think it's probably one of these things that's more salient now as we start to see more and more cosmetic procedures done to make ourselves look a certain way, and how that is really an industry that could have many, many horror stories told about it.
What is this called? I need to read this.
It's called Upgrade Soul.
Before this conversation, I thought I was well read and knew a lot about horror comics, but I guess that goes to show like how much is really out there. Everything that you've said sounds so incredible, and I've never heard of a single one of them.
And back at you, like you've had some that I have only tangentially known or hadn't heard of. This is why I love these conversations, because it's such a good state of affairs that we have so much really strong horror content in general, but specifically in comics. And how would you ever know them all?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have one more pick. Have either of you read Department of Truth? Are you familiar with the Tinian series?
I have the trade paperback on my bookshelf and have yet to crack it open. You've said that it is your favorite comic book ever. It's
Yep.
no Berserk, but I'm sure it's great.
I myself have
Craig,
not read it, but I'm a huge fan of Martin Simmons, who's the artist on the book. And I really like James's voice. So but I haven't had a chance to read that one yet.
okay. Well, Department of Truth is a story about a hidden government agency that has essentially discovered that the stories we tell shape our reality. So, if enough people start believing something, it actually comes true. And it touches on every conspiracy theory. The first four arcs, which all have trade paperbacks out now, cover things like UFOs, Kubrick's moon landing, flat Earth, all of that kind of stuff. And the most current iteration, I feel like they are writing it on a like weekly basis and just like getting it out because everything they write about seems to happen a week later, which also makes me think that James Tinian has created a bit of a tulpa with Department of Truth influencing what is happening in our reality. But that's a little bit more of a meta discussion. But if you have any interest in any like conspiracy thought or any of that kind of thing, like it covers the Satanic Panic. The leader of the organization of the Department of Truth is Harvey Oswald. Like this series is insane and covers centuries of conspiracy theory and is also very coherent and has a beautifully eerie and disturbing collage style art to it. So yeah, I can't recommend this series enough to people, and I hope more people check it out.
I'm sorry. Did you say Earth being flat is a conspiracy?
Um, well, uh,
Okay. Well, I know
well,
what kind of
okay,
podcast
okay.
this is, guys, and so have fun with your ignorance. I gotta. Just kidding. Just
Wait, wait,
kidding.
wait, Joseph. The Earth is
Please don't cut
flat.
out the part where I said yes. I agree. Thank you.
The Earth is flat because most of the Earth is water. Like what, 70%, 90% of the Earth is water, and very little of it is carbonated.
So explain that. I was just on a plane yesterday, flying coast to coast. Okay, I sat window seat the whole time looking for a curve. I didn't see it. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm just asking questions.
I'm just saying there's no bubbles in the ocean. That sounds like flat water to me.
But there are word bubbles in the Department of Truth, which you can read at comic book stores everywhere. I've been
Okay,
really meaning
yeah.
to get into that series because like the art's good. All of the critical praise I've read for it says like the good taste
Yeah.
havers that I follow online all say it's great.
Yep. I can't recommend it anymore, but I'm excited to read all of these things that you have recommended to me as well. I'm glad I had some overlap and we got to talk about Beneath the Trees and the history and what is horror. And I'm sure we could do a part two to this. We could do stuff on horror manga and anime, but I think this is a great primer for what the Hallow Ian Horror Pod is into when it comes to horror comics. So thank you for joining me. Craig, where can folks find you and your work?
So you can find my work at hspcomics.com, hspcomics.com. You can also find Curse of Dark Shadows on the Hermes Press website, Station Grand at the Oni Press website, Boris Karloff Gold Key Mysteries at the Gold Key website, and keep an eye for an announcement coming pretty soon about a non-horror book that I'm working on if you love dogs, as most people should.
Joseph, where can the people find you?
I am on every piece of social media under the exact same handle, which is at #spooky. I have two things that I need to promote. On March 25th, I will be hosting a comic book crash course where I'm going over the very basics on how to write comic book scripts. So join me for that. It'll be a very interactive workshop. I'm going to take you through the process, start to finish, to have a script ready to go, to show to an artist, to get them on board to help draw your comic book. Then on April 20th, I am launching the Kickstarter for Greenhouse of Doom, which is the third entry in my anthology series.
That's amazing. This episode is going to come out in April. Do you have anything else in April or May that you want to promote?
You got to keep the promotion for that in there.
Yep.
And then I'm going to blame you specifically for nobody showing up to my class.
I'm sure you can find all of us at Crypticon Seattle on May 1st through 3rd. The Halloween Horror Hour will be doing a showing on Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. So come find us there. If you want to support the show, we do have a Patreon. We have a free level and we have moneyed levels. You can get bonus content, access to our Discord, watch-alongs, cool exclusive merch, all that kind of stuff. Really fun. And then you can also just buy a ton of awesome merch over at our website, over on HalloweenHorrorHour.com, which is our beautiful new website that just launched in late February of this year. Thank you, Craig and Joseph, for joining me. I know that you both will be back on the show in the near future. Craig, very soon when we have our
Yes.
discussion about Are Vampires Too Sexy?
And the answer is yes. And they need to stop it. Tone it down, guys. We do not need that level of sexy.
I
So-
disagree entirely. People need to be afraid for their life and horny at the same time.
And I am somewhere in the middle, and we'll have that discussion in 2 weeks with Brianna Malotki and Ruby Rains. So thank you for joining us for another episode of the Halloween Horror Pod, an extension of the television show The Halloween Horror Hour, which you can watch on Tubi, Plex, Roku, CCTV 28 if you're in the Seattle area, or you can head on over to YouTube where everything is available as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all in the graveyard again soon.
I would like to state for the record that I'm not a flat earther.